I am Zara Mendoza, a 30-year-old heir to a dynasty that seems to own half the glittering skyline of Miami, Florida. When people hear the surname Mendoza, they picture the crimson glass towers of the Coral Crown Resort, the palm-lined entrance of Biscayne Palace Casino, and the midnight fireworks that blossom over South Beach during every corporate gala. They do not picture me. Inside the family, I am the quiet failure, the eldest daughter who keeps tripping over her own shadow, the one whose startups collapse like sandcastles at high tide. My father, Lorenzo Mendoza, carved the empire from a single beachfront motel into a constellation of luxury properties that dot coastlines from Cancun to Key West. His handshake can seal multi-million-dollar deals before breakfast, and his hawk-sharp gaze makes vice presidents quiver if his eyebrow twitches. My mother, Isabella, glides through charity galas in pearl-white gowns, her smile flawless yet remote, as though she's forever measuring the room against some invisible ledger. Then there are my younger siblings, those effortless prodigies who collect accolades like others collect postcards. Matteo, 26, designs celebrity mansions on Star Island. Magazines call him a visionary. Lucia, 24, is already an assistant U.S. attorney, chaining courtroom victories like pearls on a string. Journalists describe them with words such as brilliant, unstoppable, incandescent. When they mention me, if they mention me, they choose words like wayward, unfocused, ill-fated. From the moment I could walk, Father drilled into me that I would someday pilot Mendoza Holdings. At 7 years old, he placed a miniature ledger in my hands and told me to learn the alchemy of numbers. At 10, he marched me through construction sites, pointing out piling depths and rebar gauges as bulldozers roared. At 14, he entered me in private strategy tournaments, where sons and daughters of tycoons fenced with balance sheets while tutors marked our missteps. Back then, I believed the empire was my destiny. Yet the more Father molded me, the more I felt like clay that refused to harden into his chosen statue. By the time I graduated from Wharton, top 10 in my class, though never first, my rebellion had crystallized into a silent oath. I would craft a legacy untouched by the Mendoza crest. I launched a beachside coffee house called Low Tide and Ink, pairing single-origin brews with live spoken-word nights. 6 months later, a leasing warlord doubled the rent, and the cafe capsized. I pivoted to a boutique clothing label, Seafire Threads, using reclaimed silk and hemp from women-led co-ops in Oaxaca. A year of Miami Fashion Week tents bled my accounts dry. Next came a mobile app linking muralists with property owners hungry for edgy facades. The code worked. The market yawned. Each implosion echoed like a gong through our Coconut Grove mansion, La Pergola, a stucco palace wreathed in bougainvillea. During every Sunday, Asado Father would set down his silver carving knife with surgical precision and ask, "Zara, what lesson have we learned from this week's misadventure?" Mother sighed as if bracing for shrapnel. Matteo offered sympathetic yet smug half-smiles, and Lucia traced circles on her wineglass, already composing the speech she would give if asked to salvage my contracts. I escaped to a one-bedroom loft in Wynwood, far from La Pergola's manicured perfection. Exposed brick walls sweat in the Miami humidity, and the skylight leaks during tropical storms, but the loft is mine. I fall asleep to reggaeton, drifting from street parties, and dream of imprinting something indelible on the city, though each dawn I wake to the same refrain: "Prove you are not a footnote in the family ledger." The call that changed everything arrived on a thunder-racked Thursday, when lightning stitched the horizon beyond Port Miami's cranes. I was staring at the spreadsheet of yet another abandoned plan, a surf therapy startup, when Dexter Cruz's name flashed on my phone. Dexter and I had shared a Wharton seminar on disruptive finance. He dazzled professors with silver-tongued pitches and scalped VIP festival passes on weekends. Even now, his grin retained that fox-like mischief. "Zara, amiga, I've got a gem," he announced, voice crackling through static. An abandoned Texaco station out by US Highway 1 near Homestead. The owner just slashed the price to a ridiculous figure. Snap it up, and you'll catch the wave when the state finalizes the South Dade Expressway extension. An old gas station, I muttered, eyeing the drip bucket beneath my skylight. I am finished chasing mirages, Dex. Listen, he coaxed, dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I have the county's planning documents on my desk. In 2 years, that corridor becomes a logistics spine, farm-to-port cold storage, ecotour lodges, maybe even a boutique spaceport. Buy now, spend a little on rehab, and you can flip for 10, maybe 15 times your stake. Or turn it into something iconic and watch the cash flow forever. This is your resurrection arc. I nearly laughed. My savings resembled a battlefield littered with red numbers, rent, utilities, favors I could never repay. Still, Dexter's promise bored beneath my ribs, where rage and ambition coiled like twin serpents. What if this was the pivot I needed? A chance to engrave Zara on the city's map in letters father could not erase, yet distrust pricked me. Dexter thrived on other people's optimism. How much? I asked. $20,000, he replied, a mountain of granite to me, a pebble to the Mendozas. But decide fast. The seller is desperate. I can stall him for 48 hours, tops. 2 full spins of the clock to gamble what remained of my credibility. Outside, thunder cracked as if Miami itself dared me to leap. I told Dexter I would think. When the call ended, I pressed my forehead to the rain-chilled window and watched the water smear Brickell's skyline into trembling constellations. In those liquid reflections, I saw both my failures and a flicker of possibility begging not to be ignored. That night, I did not sleep. I paced warped floorboards, multiplying numbers, arguing with phantom voices of my parents. Just before dawn bruised the sky lavender, I whispered into the darkness, "One more try." Whether courage or madness, the words ignited a pulse fiercer than anything I had felt in years. And so, at first light, I steered my sputtering sedan south on Highway 1 toward Homestead, ready to confront the ruins Dexter swore would become my salvation. The sun was barely a pale suggestion behind low-hanging clouds as I crossed the last chance drawbridge and left the bright postcard of Miami behind. Within 40 minutes, the glass towers shrank in my rearview mirror, replaced by endless nurseries of palms and tomato fields stretching toward the Everglades. Southbound traffic on US Highway 1 was thin at dawn. A few produce trucks rumbling toward farmers' markets, a battered school bus painted with a mariachi band crest, 2 motorcycles whose riders leaned into the humid wind like spearfish. My sedan, a faded silver Civic that still wore the dents of past miscalculations, coughed every time I pushed past 60, yet managed to keep pace with my thudding pulse. I replayed Dexter's pitch until the words bruised my thoughts. 10 times your stake. Iconic. Resurrection arc. I tried to picture the gas station, but my imagination offered only clichés. Rust-striped pumps, a leaning prize board advertising ancient unleaded, a convenience store window, spider-webbed by hurricanes long forgotten. At mile marker 348, I saw a faded billboard, Homestead, Gateway to the Keys. Beyond it, the scrubland looked more like a forgotten back gate than a gateway. Even the wild grasses seemed unsure whether to grow or wilt. Dexter waited for me at a shuttered Cuban bakery on Campbell Drive, nursing a cortadito in a paper cup as though we were meeting for brunch rather than a life-altering gamble. He wore khaki chinos, loafers without socks, and a linen blazer so crisp it made my thrift store jeans look like contraband. "Amiga," he crowed, tossing his espresso cup into a bin and spreading his arms as though the parking lot were a red carpet runway. I braced myself, half expecting a hug, but he settled for a grin that showed every porcelain-capped tooth. "Got the keys from the owner's nephew," he announced, jangling a rusty ring of brass like a triumphant jailer. "You ready to see your gem?" I managed a nod, though my stomach felt as if I had swallowed a live eel. We drove in separate cars, Dexter weaving ahead like a tour guide, determined to keep the mystery alive. 10 minutes later, we turned off the highway onto a cracked frontage road lined with sabal palms and discarded tires. There it was, Redland, Texaco. The red letters sun-bleached to a pinkish ghost, perched above 2 rusted pump islands and a cinder-block store whose stucco facade peeled in sheets. A toppled ice cooler lay on its side like a whale carcass. A single payphone, minus a handset, dangled wires that swayed when the breeze stirred. I parked beside an oil-stained curb, killed the engine, and let silence underline the scene. If this was a gem, it had been buried under decades of neglect and at least 3 hurricanes. Dexter hopped out, clapping his hands. Picture it after a coat of Art Deco teal, solar panels on the canopy, neon script reading La Gasolina Cantina, craft tacos and eco-ethanol in one stop. He spun in a slow circle as if conjuring holographic blueprints. I walked toward the storefront and peered through a cracked window. Dust motes drifted in slanted sunlight, illuminating cobwebs thicker than yarn. Shelves lay overturned. The floor was littered with sun-bleached lottery slips and a mummified iguana. Heat pressed in, smelling of scorched plywood and diesel ghosts. I rested my palm on the door, feeling the paint crumble beneath my fingertips, and asked, "When did it close?" "Hurricane Andrew took its last breath," Dexter said. That was 1992, I calculated, more than 3 decades. He launched into a rapid-fire summary. The absentee owner, a retired serviceman, now living in Pensacola. The nephew, desperate to offload the property to pay medical bills. The county's expansion blueprint that would reroute freight traffic straight. Past this junction, once the South Dade Expressway extension tied into Card Sound Road. He spoke of opportunity zones, tax abatements, a green fuel grant the state might resurrect. The figures tumbled from his mouth like dice across a casino felt. Probabilities, promises, risk disguised as certainty. I listened, yet I also listened to the crack in my own confidence, the faint tremor behind each breath. You have been here before. You have believed salesmen with visions. Still, something about the loneliness of the place tugged at me. The Texaco reminded me of my own sidelined ambitions. Rusted, yes, but still standing. I circled the pumps. Under the canopy, I found a trap door that once housed fuel filters. Its padlock was snapped, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. I flicked my phone's flashlight on, but saw only dust swirling above blackness. "It needs love," Dexter admitted, sensing my silence. "But the bones are solid. The county assessed the land at $12,000. You can grab it for 20, hole through the rezoning, and you'll be sitting on a gold mine." 12,000, I echoed mentally, yet he was asking me to pay 20. The familiar ache of potential exploitation pricked at my ribs. But then I imagined the highway's ribbon of headlights curving past a renovated oasis painted in tropical pastels, a sign blazing Zara's Oasis, fuel and art bar, and I felt a reckless surge of ownership pulse through my bloodstream, undeniable as the humidity. Dexter pressed the keyring into my hand, metal warm from his pocket. "Take a day to breathe it in," he said, dropping his voice to a hush. "I promised the nephew your answer by tomorrow night." "Call me once the vision clicks." He strode back to his car, leaving whirls of dust spiraling in his wake. I remained beneath the silent Texaco canopy, the keys heavy as a verdict. A red-shouldered hawk screeched overhead, settling on the rusted price board where unleaded once sold for 99 cents. I watched the bird study the horizon, unbothered by the crumbling man-made relic beneath its talons, and a thought shot through me. Maybe ruin is just potential wearing yesterday's clothes. By the time I drove back to Wynwood that evening, The sky had bruised to indigo, and my mind churned with calculations. I had less than $8,000 in liquid cash, but I owned a vintage Vespa I could hawk, some crypto I could liquidate, maybe even a small friendly loan from Tia Marisol, the only relative who believed I was more than a cautionary tale. 20,000 felt like a canyon, yet not an unbridgeable one. As I slipped my key into the loft door, rain began to patter on the skylight, the leak starting its familiar tap into the bucket. I stared at the water rings staining the wood floor and pictured the Texaco's concrete island catching its first rainfall in 30 years, first cleansing, then renewal. I whispered into the room's humid hush, "One more try." And for the first night in a long while, I believed the words might not drown. Sleep never truly came that night. Instead, the humid dark of my Wynwood loft held me in a restless limbo, while ceiling fan shadows swung like slow pendulums over exposed brick. I checked my phone for the time, once, twice, a dozen times, each glance bringing the same mocking digits that reminded me dawn was still far away. At last, unable to endure the drip, drip, drip of rain into the tin bucket by the sofa, I flicked on the cracked screen laptop perched on my kitchen counter and opened a spreadsheet titled Possible Lifelines. In neat columns, I listed every asset I possessed: a cherry red 1968 Vespa in working condition, appraised last year for a little under 4,000, a tiny sliver of cryptocurrency I had bought during a feverish bull run, and then ignored, perhaps worth 3,000 if the market gods were merciful. 2 designer handbags collecting dust from the days when I still believed appearances could outrun substance. And finally, the long-shot hope of a personal loan from Tia Marisol, my mother's younger sister, who managed a modest Montessori school in Coral Gables and had once slipped me a quiet 500 to cover utilities after Seafire Threads imploded. Even if I liquidated everything, I would still be several thousand short of the $20,000 canyon that separated me from that rusted Texaco. That arithmetic might have ended the night right there, yet another black mark in the expansive ledger of my misfires, if not for an email that arrived at 3:17 in the morning with the soft chime of a distant bell. The sender line read, "Isabella Mendoza," and for a moment my breath locked in my throat. My mother's messages, when they arrived at all, were careful constructs of concern wrapped around faint disappointment, the textual equivalent of a hand smoothing wrinkles from an already perfect tablecloth. I clicked. "Zara, your father and I will be attending the Ocean Conservation Gala tomorrow evening. I hope you will consider joining us. There is a networking segment before dinner. Investors, developers, city officials. I believe it could be useful for you should you be searching for new directions. Let me know. Love, Mami." "New directions," I muttered, feeling the spark of something defiant kindle in my chest. She had no idea how literal her words might become. Yet the mention of investors set a gear turning. That room at the Biltmore would be filled with individuals who spent more on yacht fuel in a month than the Texaco would cost me. I pictured myself weaving through crystal chandeliers and coral reef ice sculptures, telling the story of a forgotten gas station poised on the edge of infrastructure rebirth. It was a gamble. These people usually invested in polished ventures with immaculate pitch decks, but I had nothing left except gambles. And perhaps, I admitted grudgingly, I needed to show my parents I could still stand tall enough to be seen. Just after sunrise, I called Marisol, rehearsing a speech about entrepreneurial persistence, community revitalization, green grants, but she cut me off midway with gentle laughter. "Mi niña, you do not need to audition for me. Tell me what you need." By 8 o'clock, she had wired 5,000 into my barren checking account, instructing me not to worry about repayment until the station turned a profit. The Vespa sold that afternoon to a tattooed barista who nearly vibrated with joy as he rode away beneath baking midday heat, handing me an envelope thick with cash. I scheduled the crypto sale for the next market spike and listed the handbags on a luxury resale site. By dusk, I was still 2,000 short, but the distance felt manageable, like the last few feet of shoreline before the sandbar rises. That evening, I donned a midnight blue cocktail dress, one of the few remnants from charity galas long past, and drove to the historic Biltmore Hotel in Coral Gables. Palm fronds whispered above the parking court, and valets in white jackets snapped doors open with choreographed precision. Inside the grand ballroom, ocean-themed LED projections danced across coffered ceilings, while a string quartet played a languid arrangement of La Vie en Rose. I spotted my parents near a centerpiece aquarium filled with tiny bioluminescent jellyfish. My father's tuxedo fit like a second skin. My mother's gown shimmered seafoam silver. They looked, as always, sculpted from a different world. The networking hour was a tide of introductions, bankers smelling faintly of sandalwood and hubris, developers whose schedules were weaponized down to the half-minute, philanthropists balancing cruelty and charm on the edges of their champagne. Flutes. I repeated my pitch. Abandoned Texaco, highway extension, eco-fuel vision, until the words felt like river stones smoothed by current. Several listeners excused themselves politely. A few offered business cards paired with non-committal nods. Yet one conversation cracked open possibility. Mariana Reyes, a 30-something venture capitalist who rumors said had doubled her fund on a solar microgrid startup, listened with an intensity that knifed through the room's ambient ennui. "You're talking about repurposing brownfield property into a dual-use hub, sustainable fuel and cultural experience," she said, swirling ice in her glass. "That intersects 3 boxes on our impact rubric." She handed me her card, matte black with a minimalist sea turtle logo, and instructed me to call Monday if I secured the deed. Hope flared bright enough to outshine chandelier light. Returning home well past midnight, I counted my pledges and quick sale assets. By morning, I could scrape together the remaining 2,000. The question that prowled through my loft, however, was trust. Could I, who had swallowed baited hooks before, rely on Dexter's numbers? I decided to meet the property's legal owner myself. With some coaxing, Dexter furnished the phone number of Sergeant Henry Alvarado, retired Coast Guard engineer and current proprietor of Redland Texaco. Sergeant Alvarado answered in a gravelly baritone tinged with suspicion. I introduced myself, explained I was interested in purchasing the station, and requested a face-to-face meeting. He paused long enough that static hissed between us, then agreed to see me Sunday afternoon at his modest bungalow in Pensacola. The drive would be 6 hours each way, a marathon of asphalt and caffeine, but instinct told me this was a threshold I needed to cross. Sunday dawned slate gray. I filled the Civic's tank, packed a cooler with empanadas, and steered northwest along Alligator Alley, the Everglades spreading like a living quilt of sawgrass and water on either side. As miles unspooled beneath my tires, I rehearsed questions. Why had the station truly closed? Were there environmental liens? Underground storage tanks leaking benzene? I also wondered whether the nephew had misrepresented facts to Dexter, whether the 12,000 county assessment hid darker truths. Pensacola greeted me with Gulf breezes carrying brine and the distant bark of gulls. Sergeant Alvarado's bungalow sat on a quiet street lined with pecan trees. He met me on the porch, thick-set, white-mustached, with eyes the color of storm clouds that have seen too many horizons. Over sweet tea, he described inheriting the Texaco from a distant cousin, acknowledging decades of neglect and confessing he had never set eyes on the property after Hurricane Andrew's devastation. "Place is more rust than steel now," he said, yet he confirmed the sale price Dexter quoted and produced a folder of clear title documents. I scanned the pages. No liens, no pending environmental fines, only back taxes amounting to a few hundred. Relief seeped through me like cool water. Before I left, the sergeant gripped my hand with surprising gentleness. If you're set on bringing that station back to life, treat it right. My cousin used to say the land there remembers everything. Storms, sun, secrets. I promised I would, and meant it. Night had fully fallen by the time I reached Winwood, but fatigue could not blunt the thrill thrumming in my veins. Monday morning, I wired an initial deposit of $10,000 to Sergeant Alvarado's escrow agent, money drawn from the Vespa sale and Marisol's loan. The balance, bolstered by handbag proceeds and the crypto liquidation, followed 48 hours later. 24 hours after that, a notary FedExed the deed to my loft, and under the flicker of the leaky skylight, I signed my name, Zara Mendoza, across the bottom line in looping blue ink. I read the document once, twice, a third time, letting the truth root itself. The Redland Texaco was now mine, every cracked window pane, every rusted pump, every square foot of sun-baked concrete. I felt neither triumph nor terror, but a steadier flame, like a pilot light finally catching. Outside, thunder muttered beyond the city's glow. I imagined the derelict station asleep beneath that same sky, waiting for the first scrape of a broom, the first spark of welding torch, the first glimpse of new possibility, and I whispered into the night, "Tomorrow we begin." Signed deed in hand. Drove south at dawn, the day after the papers were notarized, feeling as though every mile marker on US Highway 1 clicked into place like a bead on an abacus, tallying the start of my true life. The humid air smelled of cut grass and asphalt, still radiating last night's heat, and I rolled the windows down to let it drown the lingering tremor of disbelief. I kept the manila folder on the passenger seat, glancing at the embossed stamp whenever self-doubt jabbed me. Owner of record, Zara Mendoza. I half expected the document to evaporate in the wind, proof that this whole detour from family expectation was some hallucination spun from late-night caffeine and the rainwater echoing in a bucket. But the folder stayed stubbornly real, and by the time I reached the cracked frontage road where cabbage palms bowed in the breeze like weather-worn monks, I felt the first cautious swell of authority slip over my shoulders. The Redland Texaco greeted me no differently than before, stucco peeling like sunburn, pump handles drooping at odd angles, a shattered Bud Light bottle glinting blue beside the curb. But I noticed details I had missed in my earlier trance of appraisal. A thin hibiscus had sprouted through a seam in the concrete island, its carmine petals incongruous against rust and grease stains. A wren had built a nest inside the hollow of an old credit card reader, bits of Spanish moss poking out like green. Confetti. Even in ruin, the place harbored life. I shut off the engine, stepped into the sweltering silence, and pressed my palm flat against the station's grimy wall. The concrete radiated heat like a living pulse, as if it too recognized the shift in custody. The morning marched forward in a blur of practical tasks. First order, electricity. The power company agreed to inspect the line in 48 hours, provided I cleared vegetation around the meter. I hacked through vines with a borrowed machete until my shoulders burned, unveiling a rusted box that looked more relic than hardware. Next came water. The county utility map showed a capped well somewhere on the east edge of the lot. I located the pipe by prodding the sandy ground with a crowbar until metal rang beneath my feet, then spent an hour kneeling in red dust unscrewing corroded bolts, while fire ants rallied along my wrists. When the cap finally broke loose, the stink of stagnant water wafted up in a sulphurous sigh, and I gagged, but laughed too, because the land was speaking its first words to me, unpleasant, yes, but honest. Inside the convenience store, rays of noon sun slanted through the broken window like interrogation lamps, revealing shelves warped into parentheses and a floor mosaic of smashed fluorescent tubes. I pulled on garden gloves and began the long ritual of sorting. Glass to one trash can, plastic to another, unsalvageable metal to a growing scrap pile near the pumps. With each sweep of the broom, a layer of the station's old story lifted, releasing motes that spiraled through light like half-remembered ghosts. I found a stack of faded postcards advertising the Severe Tire Damage Tour, 1991, all neon palm trees and cartoon armadillos, a child's lunchbox shaped like a space shuttle, a ledger of fuel deliveries ending abruptly 5 days before. Hurricane Andrew carved its ruinous path. Everything felt like a breadcrumb thrown back in time. Around mid-afternoon, sweat-soaked and dizzy, I remembered the trapdoor beneath the pump canopy, the rectangular hatch I had only peered into on my first visit. My phone's flashlight was still cued to the image of swirling dust that had greeted me then. I rolled my shoulders, took a long pull from a lukewarm water bottle, and crossed the cracked forecourt. The hatch lay flush with concrete, hinged and padlock-free, a startled mouth waiting to be pried wider. I knelt, hooked my fingers beneath the iron ring, and lifted. The hatch groaned open, exhaling a breath colder than the surface air, damp and mineral, carrying the faint scent of machinery long stilled. A metal ladder descended into darkness. I tested a rung with my heel. It held. I switched on the flashlight, widened the beam, and began to climb. 5 rungs, 10, 15. The light swung across a narrow corridor lined in corrugated steel, perhaps an old spill containment trench. Water dripped rhythmically from somewhere unseen, echoing with cathedral gravity. On the final rung, my boots splashed into a shallow puddle, and I shivered despite the heat perspiring through my denim. The corridor extended ahead, then bent sharply right, disappearing behind a wall of shadow. I forced a breath through my teeth and took a step. The first room I entered could barely be called a room, more a vault, maybe 8 feet square, reinforced by concrete ribs. Along one wall hung a bank of rusted gauges, needles frozen at impossible pressures. Beside them perched an ancient hand-crank pump, embossed with the Texaco star. A tangle of hoses lay coiled like sleeping pythons beneath, and there, against the far corner, stacked 3 high, were wooden crates the size of carry-on luggage, each banded in tarnished brass. My light caught lettering stenciled across the planks. L.G. Spirits Co., Nassau. The crates' lids were intact, edges sealed with black pitch that had hardened into glossy ridges. A thrill crawled up my spine. Liquor? The Bahamas? 1920s? My brain fired associations faster than I could sort them. Prohibition smuggling routes, rum runner folklore along the Keys, secret caches moved inland to dodge Coast Guard patrols. But one crate, the smallest, bore no pitch seal, only a row of rust-ripped nails and a rotted length of sisal rope. I set the flashlight on an overturned bucket, wedged the beam toward the box, and pried at the nails with a crowbar fished from my tool belt. Wood splintered softly, releasing a dusty sweetness that smelled of molasses and vanished summers. Under the loosened lid, straw padding glimmered gold in the beam. I pushed aside fibers and touched cool glass. My fingers recognized the shape of a bottle's neck before sight confirmed it. I lifted one carefully. Green glass, thick as an antique Coca-Cola, its cork smeared in dark wax. A label, faded but legible, read Santiago de Las Vegas, Añejo 1920. I stared until the words blurred. An aged Cuban rum, bottled more than 100 years ago, perhaps older than the Texaco itself. Behind it, nestled in straw like jewels in velvet, sat 11 more bottles, 12 total, an even dozen. I ran numbers in my head. Auction values for pre-Castro rums, the fevered market for Prohibition-era spirits. Even conservative estimates whispered tens of thousands. But deeper than profit, a sense of narrative throbbed. The land does remember everything, storms and secrets alike, and it had elected to reveal this story to me. For a breathless moment, the entire station above felt like a husk surrounding a hidden heart now beating in my gloved hands. I resealed the crate, marked it with blue chalk, and backed toward the ladder, pulse racing. Evening light slid the hatch above, beckoning like a rescue flare. As I climbed, a single thought repeated with every rung. What else is waiting in the dark? I pushed the hatch closed, turned the key in its new padlock, and leaned against the pump, chest heaving. Cicadas screamed in the palmettos, a thunderhead gathered purple on the western horizon. I knew the renovation just transformed into an excavation, and tomorrow's first task would be to return below, with better light, a camera, and someone who could tell me exactly how rare a century-old Cuban rum might be. For now, though, I slid into the Civic and let the engine idle, headlights painting the cracked Texaco sign in pale gold. A hurricane of possibilities spun in my skull, but the edge of fear felt strangely distant. Ruin, I realized, was no longer potential wearing yesterday's clothes. Ruin was unwrapping itself, offering gifts. And at last, beneath the humming stars of a Florida dusk, I felt ready to accept them. I woke before sunrise, jolted upright by a surge of exhilaration that felt stronger than caffeine and terror combined. Dawn pressed a pale blue edge against the blinds, and every muscle in my body hummed with the memory of damp concrete, straw-lined crates, and the sweet molasses ghost of century-old Cuban rum. I gulped water, threw on ripped jeans, and loaded the Civic like a field archaeologist on an emergency call-out. 2 heavy-duty LED work lanterns, a portable floodlight, my battered DSLR with twin memory cards, a spool of yellow caution tape, and a brand new padlock to replace the rusty latch on the trapdoor. Before stepping out, I shot a text to Sofia Aguilar, a curator I'd met once at the Key West Rum Museum while chasing sponsorship money for Seafire Threads. Sofia, it's Zara Mendoza. We spoke about pre-prohibition distilleries last year. I've uncovered something extraordinary in Homestead. Think 12 bottles of Santiago de las Vegas Añejo 1920, perfectly sealed. Could use your expert eyes. Confidential. I didn't wait for a response. There was no time to waste on "Are you sure?" replies. The Civic sped south, citrus light igniting the eastern sky, and my reflection in the windshield looked equal parts treasure hunter and madwoman, wind-whipped curls, eyes already dilated by adrenaline. The Texaco shimmered in the early heat as though it too had stayed up all night plotting the next chapter. I popped the trunk, hoisted the gear, and marched straight to the hatch. Yesterday's padlock surrendered to my bolt cutters with a satisfying snap, and the hatch plate groaned open again, releasing that same cool exhalation from the earth's throat. This time, beams of white light splashed down the ladder, throwing my shadow long and skewed against the steel walls. I descended cautiously. Even with industrial LEDs blazing, the subterranean corridor felt like a different dimension, one where rusted gauges doubled as clock faces frozen in a separate epoch. Water dripped steadily into puddles that mirrored my boots. I had pocketed a disposable respirator just in case mildew spores were plotting a mutiny, but the air felt cleaner than before, as though the scent of aged rum had driven out the worst of the rot. The first vault waited exactly as I'd left it, blue chalk rune marking the crate like a secret handshake. I set up my camera on a tripod, snapped wide shots for context, then close-ups of every faded stencil and brass hinge. The flash burst like silent fireworks, illuminating decades of neglect with forensic clarity. Next, I rotated the lanterns toward the corridor's bend. Yesterday, I'd ignored that right-hand dogleg, too high on adrenaline to risk a blind crawl. Now I advanced, boots sloshing. The passage narrowed, then widened into a larger chamber whose ceiling was reinforced by steel I-beams. My light swept across at least 10 more crates, some stamped with the Nassau label, others marked Havana Imports, Especial Reserva. A smaller wooden coffer, no bigger than a shoebox, sat off to the side. It was padlocked with an ornately scrolled brass hasp. I ran a gloved fingertip over the lock, surprised to feel the faint embossing of a hummingbird mid-flight. I wanted nothing more than to pry that lock open, but caution whispered that tampering alone might destroy provenance. Instead, I photographed everything, scribbled inventory notes into a spiral notebook. Crate number 5, 36 bottles, unknown brand, corks intact. Crate number 6, markings illegible, tar seal present. Halfway through cataloging, my phone buzzed. A new message from Sophia. Zara, if your ID is correct, each bottle could fetch 15 to 25,000 at auction, more if the liquid is intact. I can drive up tomorrow. Do not move or uncork anything until I arrive. Proud of you for finding this. 25,000. My knees wobbled so hard, I had to squat beside the lantern to steady my pulse. Simple math bloomed behind my eyes. If 12 bottles equaled roughly 250,000, and these new crates held hundreds. Footsteps. The faint scuff echoed from above, followed by a muffled male laugh. I killed the floodlight and extinguished the lanterns in a single motion, plunging the vault into velvet darkness. I listened, heart drumming, as gravel crunched near the pumps. Another voice, higher, almost breezy, carried through the hatch opening I'd left ajar. "Dex, you weren't kidding. Place is a wreck," the stranger said. "Dexter," my breath hitched. What was he doing here unannounced and with company? I eased back down the corridor, fingers brushing cool steel until I found the ladder. Pausing halfway up, I allowed just my eyes to crest the hatch rim. Dexter stood at the forecourt with a tall man in an off-the-rack navy suit, both surveying the station like buzzards eyeing roadkill. Dexter's Armani loafers were dusted red from the parking slab, but he still managed that trademark grin. "Just imagine," he was saying, gesturing grandly, "solar canopy, fresh asphalt, gourmet truckers market. And I know the new owner intimately. We can wedge ourselves into equity early." I felt heat flush my cheeks. I had suspected Dexter might try to insert himself once the deed was signed, but courting investors behind my back. I slid the hatch shut as quietly as rust would allow, twisted the new padlock in place, and stepped into the open. "Funny running into you, Dexter," I called, voice brighter than I felt. "Touring without permission?" He spun, features twitching before smoothing into charm. "Zara, was just showing my colleague Mr. Barnes here what a prime location you scored. Thought maybe we could brainstorm." Barnes offered a limp handshake. His cologne smelled like synthetic cedar. I crossed my arms. Brainstorming is premature. The property needs environmental assessment, structural reports, real due diligence." Dexter flashed a wounded look. Of course. I just know capital when I see it. Wanted to make sure you weren't overwhelmed." Translation. He'd heard a rumor, or sensed profit, and was circling. I let a smile sharpen. "Tell you what, Dex, give me a month. If I decide I need partners, you'll be first in line." He tried to mask disappointment, but Barnes checked his watch, already bored. They departed with perfunctory nods, tires spitting gravel. As the dust settled, I secured the convenience store door with a shiny new chain, then paced the forecourt until adrenaline dispersed into a slow, rolling anger. Dexter's surprise visit confirmed my instinct. Secrecy was paramount. Back in the loft that night, I copied every photo to an encrypted drive and emailed a handful of lower-resolution shots to Sophia, requesting an NDA before she stepped foot on site. She responded within minutes, attaching a signed document and an itinerary. Tuesday, 0900 a.m. arrival, Miami International Airport. I sank onto the futon, rain tapping the skylight in soft applause. 2 days from now, an expert would confirm what my gut already knew. The Redland Texaco housed a buried fortune, one that could bankroll renovation, hush Dexter's meddling, and most importantly, prove to the world that Zara Mendoza could shepherd her own empire of possibility. Through the cracked window, the Miami skyline glittered like coins in a fountain. Closing my eyes, I imagined neon letters, Zara's Oasis, blazing against the night sky, surrounded by palms and string lights and stories whispered over copper-rimmed rum glasses distilled a century earlier on a different island. All I had to do was keep the secret safe for 48 more hours and let the future uncask itself, drop by amber drop. The sky was still a faint ribbon of powder blue when I parked at Miami International's arrivals curb, blinking away the residue of a 2-hour catnap. A tide of bleary business travelers dragged roller bags across the terrazzo. No one spared a glance for the hand-lettered placard I held at my chest. S.A. The initials were a precaution. Better that casual onlookers assume I was an airport chauffeur. Then learn the real reason a rum curator was flying in at dawn. Sofia Aguilar emerged through the sliding doors with the confident stride of someone who had long ago conquered jet lag. A linen jumpsuit clung to her small frame, practical pockets everywhere, and a straw hat cast half-moon shadows across her cheekbones. When she spotted me, she lifted an eyebrow, offered a quick grin, and said, "Hey girl, looks like you're running on pure adrenaline." The greeting landed like a secret handshake. I laughed, more relief than humor, and hustled her toward my battered Civic before the terminal's glass facade could turn us into curiosities. We bypassed small talk as I merged onto the Palmetto Expressway. A cotton candy sunrise unspooled across the windshield, tinting the downtown towers pink. South of Kendall, while traffic thinned, I delivered the whole saga. Dexter's midnight trespass attempt, the hummingbird-locked coffer, the Nassau crates, and the gnawing fear that scavengers might descend faster than renovations could rise. Sophia never interrupted, only scribbled bullet points into a waterproof notebook with a gold flash pen. When I finished, she snapped the elastic band around the cover. "If the Santiago bottles are genuine and the Quinta Blanca cognac checks out," she said, voice low, "your valuation jumps from impressive to historic. But auction houses bleed authenticity. We need chain of custody, shipping ledgers, Prohibition-era manifests, anything." Those words, chain of custody, hammered home the responsibility I carried. We reached the cracked frontage road near Homestead just as heat rippled off the asphalt like invisible surf. I unlocked the newly installed chain on the convenience store door, ushered Sophia past sun-warped postcards and overturned shelving, and we descended through the hatch into the earth's cool breath. The corridor's corrugated walls amplified every footfall. Lantern beams sliced the gloom, sweeping over rusted gauges and puddles that mirrored the light like black ice. Sophia knelt beside the first blue-chalked crate, drew out a jeweler's loupe, and inspected each wax seal, every cork's slight bulge, even microscopic air bubbles shimmering inside the green glass. "Impeccable," she murmured, photographing for provenance. When she finally rose, her eyes shone with a collector's reverence. "In today's boutique spirits market, each Santiago de Las Vegas añejo could start at $35,000, she said, fingers still hovering as if reluctant to sever contact. My pulse rocketed. Quick math shoved 7 figures into the renovation column. We moved into the second chamber, where Havana imports crates waited like sleepers in cold storage dreams. The ornate brass coffer, its hasp etched with a hummingbird mid-hover, hijacked our attention. I knelt, unrolled antique lockpicks bought at a garage sale for less than a sandwich. Sophia smirked. Apparently my resume of failed fashion startups hadn't prepared her for amateur locksmith skills. 2 gentle scrapes, a soft thunk, and the hasp yawned open. Inside, nestled in red velvet, rested 6 squat flasks of liquid amber so luminous they looked backlit. Each bore a wax medallion stamped QBC and a handwritten date. MCMX3. Sophia exhaled. Quinta Blanca Cognac. Legendary. No verified bottles. Until now. Wonder threatened to swamp me, but a thunderous metallic bang split the hush. Voices barked above. Boots ground gravel near the pumps. Sophia doused the lantern. Darkness pressed like velvet. My heartbeat hammered. Halfway up the ladder, I peered through a half-inch gap. Dexter knelt, crowbar in hand, swearing as he pried at the new padlock. Beside him stood a gaunt man in a construction polo, flashlight clamped between his teeth. "Relax," Dexter hissed. "She's at some influencer breakfast. Quick peek, 1 or 2 bottles, and investors sign tomorrow." Below me, Sophia recorded with her phone, capturing faces and dialogue. After several fruitless yanks, Dexter cursed and kicked the hatch. The lock held. His partner muttered they'd need a grinder. Car doors slammed, gravel spat, silence returned. Back in the vault, dust floated through the beam of Sophia's phone. "We've got enough for trespass charges," she whispered. "Charges chew money and time," I said. "I need deterrence now." Above ground, sunlight bleached the forecourt. I phoned Matteo, the sibling least amused by my misfires, and swallowed pride. "Emergency," I said. Could he draft a provisional historic preservation plan and expedite a security fence? His laugh was half incredulity, half thrill. "Text me dimensions, hermana. I'll pull permits by sundown." The rest of the day sped in a logistical whirl. Sophia compiled inventory files. I bought industrial padlocks, a cellular trail cam, warning signs. By sunset, a contractor Matteo summoned was pounding fence posts and stringing chain link topped with razor ribbon that caught the last light like glowing halos. We bolted laminated trespass notices in 3 languages. The trail cam blinked to life beneath the pump canopy, feeding every frame to my phone. Exhaustion weighed like wet sand as the contractor's taillights faded, but relief cut through. For the first time in decades, the Redland Texaco was under vigilant watch. In the dusk, the cracked Texaco star looked almost regal behind its new armor. I laid a hand on the fence. "This land chose its keeper," I whispered. Sophia clicked off her flashlight, cicada noise swelling. "Then guard it, Zara." History rarely offers second chances. Under a mango-purple sky, I realized my fight was no longer against family doubt or personal failure. It was a stand between greed and guardianship, forgetting and remembering. Tomorrow, I'd seek landmark status, hire structural engineers, and craft a pitch deck about illicit Caribbean spirits and a stubborn woman who refused to let them rot in silence. But tonight I let the security lights hum on one by one and felt the station pulse with its new heartbeat. Steady, defiant, alive. Morning rolled in on a hush of pale gold, and for the first time since signing the deed, I allowed myself to linger in bed long enough to hear the city breathe. Distant horns, a mourning dove on the roof line, the soft hum of the mini-split doing its best against Miami's oncoming heat. Yet when I closed my eyes, all I could see was that hummingbird-etched lock and Dexter's impatient boot scuffing gravel. Languor was a luxury for people without buried legends to defend. I swung my legs over the mattress, counted to 10 to settle my nerves, and pulled on work-scarred jeans that now smelled permanently of dust and diesel. By 7 o'clock, Sophia and I were on the road again, her straw hat tipped low while she scrolled through a roster of auction house contacts. At a red light, she rattled off a to-do list: secure independent lab analysis of 2 sample bottles, draft provenance affidavits, photograph each crate under controlled lighting, and, crucially, lock in a climate-controlled storage plan before. Florida's wet season turned the vault into a subterranean sauna. I promised her half the auction proceeds for her curation expertise. She accepted with a nod that felt more pact than transaction. When we reached Redland, Texaco, a courier van idled at the gate. The driver waved a clipboard, delivering a roll of blueprint pages courtesy of Matteo. I unscrolled them right there on the hood of the Civic, a provisional site plan showing the existing pumps, the underground vault system, and dashed lines suggesting a future tasting room pavilion backed by solar canopies and native plant. Landscaping. In a corner, Matteo had scribbled, "Get this stamped historic and you'll win zoning hearts." I photographed the drawings, heartwarming in spite of decades of sibling rivalry. Whether out of genuine support or architectural vanity, Matteo had come through. We unlocked the gate and stepped onto the forecourt. The new fence gleamed in the morning light, and the trail cam's infrared eye winked reassuringly. Still, unease fluttered in my gut. I checked the camera's overnight footage from my phone. Raccoons rummaging near the ice cooler, a feral cat darting past the pumps, no human intruders. Good. Yet vigilance alone would not outpace Dexter's persistence. I needed legal armor. Inside the convenience store, we staged a makeshift office on an upturned milk crate, spreading the blueprints next to Sophia's inventory logs. I dialed the Miami-Dade Historic Preservation Division, rehearsing a concise version of the discovery. An administrator named Greta answered, her voice warm but brisk. When I mentioned Prohibition-era rum, unsealed subterranean vaults, and architectural significance of early 20th century service stations, Greta grew suddenly attentive. She penciled me into an on-site assessment slot 3 days hence, warning that any structural instability could delay designation. I glanced at the hairline cracks spider-webbing the cinder block walls and promised structural engineer reports forthwith, never mind that I had not hired an engineer yet. Sophia descended into the vault to extract 2 bottles for laboratory testing, while I rang a local firm renowned for historic renovations. The receptionist transferred me to a senior engineer named Claire Yoon, who listened quietly as I outlined the site's unique blend of decay and hidden value. Perhaps it was the urgency in my voice, or the scent of a media scoop, but she agreed to dispatch a survey crew the following morning. I scribbled the appointment on a scrap of cardboard, heart-pounding at the thought of fees, then shrugged towards Sophia, as if debt were just another muscle to flex. By midday, a blistering sun cooked the concrete forecourt. We lugged crate fragments and trash into a rented dumpster, piling decades of neglect onto the pyre of yesterday. Mid-heave, my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I answered, expecting a contractor. Instead, my father's deep baritone unfurled like a velvet curtain. "Zara," he said, no preamble. "Your brother Matteo showed me a concept drawing. He is impressed. So am I." My breath caught. I wiped sweat with the back of my arm and leaned against the dumpster's rim, suddenly a child again, counting the pauses between his sentences. "I would like to review your business plan," he continued. "Shepherding a heritage site requires capital beyond fencing and good intentions. Mendoza Holdings could—" "Stop!" I cut in, the word sharper than intended. A gull cried overhead, filling the silence. "I appreciate your concern, but this project lives and dies on my terms." A pause long enough to feel like winter. "Very well," he said at last, voice cool. "Ensure your terms include liability insurance. Good luck." The call ended, leaving the scent of paternal frost in the humid air. I pocketed the phone, chest heaving, but a stubborn fire burned where disappointment once resided. I had not crumbled. I had drawn a boundary. Late afternoon brought a low rumble of thunder over the Everglades. We retreated beneath the pump canopy, with cold water in hand, watching storm clouds stack like charcoal mountains. Sophia flipped open her notebook. "One more thing," she said, tapping a blank page. "We need a public-facing narrative. Why this site matters beyond dollar signs. Community allies deter vandals better than fences." I pictured school kids on field trips, tourists sipping a flight of century-old rum in a restored tasting room, history students tracing smuggler routes on wall maps. I pictured my younger self, nose pressed to gift shop glass at Vizcaya, thinking heritage belonged only to marble estates and gilded names. Maybe Redland Texaco could rewrite that script. Thunder cracked. Rain began to fall in heavy sudden sheets, drumming on the canopy, cleansing the forecourt. I raised my water bottle in a toast. To guardianship, I said. Sophia clinked her bottle against mine. And to rewriting legacies. Rainwater coursed toward the vault hatch, slicking the newly poured concrete seal around its frame, but the padlock held firm. Above us, the neon-scarred Texaco star flickered under the storm's first lightning flash, half broken, half bright, and wholly alive. I felt the same. Bruised by doubt, lit from within by something older than failure. Tomorrow would bring engineers, paperwork, and the inevitable counter-moves of Dexter and his investors. But tonight, thunder echoing through the chain-link perimeter, I allowed myself a single unguarded breath of satisfaction. History had begun to whisper our names, and at last I was ready to listen. At first light, the storm's afterbreath still hovered, leaving the air clear as blown glass and scented faintly of wet asphalt and jasmine vines. I unlocked the chain-link gate just as a slate-grey pickup crunched onto the frontage road, its door emblazoned Yoon and Talbot Structural Preservation. Claire Yoon stepped out in steel-toed boots and a neon surveyor's vest, dark hair coiled in a knot that warned there would be no time wasted on pleasantries. Behind her, 2 technicians unloaded tripods, ground-penetrating radar panels, and a drone with beetle-black rotors. "Quick sight rundown?" she asked, clipboard poised. "Early 20th century service station with a partially subterranean vault system," I recited, palms still tingling from yesterday's call with my father. "Primary goal is stabilization for historic designation. Secondary goal, adaptive reuse as a tasting pavilion." Claire's eyes glimmered at the word vault. "Show me," she said. For the next 3 hours, the Texaco became a patient on an operating table. The drone traced the cracked canopy, mapping stress fractures invisible to the naked eye. Radar sleds glided over the forecourt, translating subsurface echoes into oscillating graphs. One technician rappelled through the hatch, laser scanning the corridor, while Sophia stood watch with her notebook pressed to her chest like a devotional text. By mid-morning, Claire called a huddle beneath the pumps, tapping a stylus against her tablet. "Here's the blunt of it," she said. "The main slab is sound, rebar corrosion minimal. Your vault walls are overbuilt. Good news for humidity control. But you'll need a reinforced drainage trench before hurricane season. Call it low 6 figures. Roof canopy is another story. Partial replacement, hurricane clips, maybe a full solar retrofit if you want tax credits." She lifted her gaze to mine. "In short, structurally viable, historically significant, and very expensive." "Expensive," I echoed, but the word tasted less daunting than before, buoyed by the hidden bottles below and the silent math of future auctions. As the engineers packed up, Sophia's phone pinged with a lab receipt confirmation for the sample bottles, and the day's next battle lines, funding, permits, community outreach, came into focus like sunbreak through departing clouds. The afternoon heat had begun to warp the air into watery mirages over the forecourt when Sophia and I unrolled the folding table beneath the restored canopy, our makeshift war room. Claire's structural report, hot off the portable printer, lay weighted by bolts and washers like a treaty demanding signatures I was not yet sure I could write. The forecast promised 3 sun-clear days before the next tropical wave, a brief reprieve to hammer steps into certainty. I breathed in and tasted equal parts rust and possibility. First order of battle, capital. Selling the inaugural batch of Santiago rum felt as tempting as cracking a vault with dynamite. But even with Sophia's industry contacts, the path from authentication to auction could stretch 6 months, maybe more if we aimed for a headline house in New York or London. I needed an interim bridge, something that would finance drainage trenches and hurricane clips before the autumn storms chewed us alive. Traditional bank loans were a dead end. No institution would lean on a half-crumbled Texaco with unknown environmental risk. Angel investors? A possibility, though each meeting risked another Dexter hiding behind a handshake. I opened my laptop and drafted an email to Mariana Reyes, the venture capitalist who had listened so intently at the Ocean Conservation Gala. Subject: Redland Heritage Fund pitch, urgent. I attached Matteo's polished renderings, the solar canopied tasting pavilion, the desert native garden winding past polished chrome pumps restored to Art Deco glory. In the body I painted our next chapter, a micro-museum of Prohibition-era smuggling routes, guided cellar tours by hurricane-proof lanterns, partnerships with local distillers teaching barrel-aging workshops. I concluded with Claire's sober estimate. To keep the structure standing and meet state code, we needed just under $500,000. $500,000. Words that once would have flattened me, now felt like a mountain whose summit shimmered within my mental sightline. When I hit send, a flicker of doubt scurried across my chest, but Sophia snapped her notebook shut and grinned as if she sensed the tremor. "Think bigger," she said. "If investors bite, they will bite on vision, not desperation. Tell them this is the Ellis Island of Florida rum history." Her confidence fortified me as I dialed a second number, Greta at the Historic Preservation Division. I had promised preliminary engineer notes within a week. Now I offered the full structural scan, a digital vault model, photographs of period-accurate pump signage, even Jonathan, one of Claire's technicians, volunteering to testify that the rebar and slab exceeded standards of the day by at least 20%. Greta's appreciative hum on the other end sounded almost like approval in embryonic form. She penciled our official field inspection for 2 Mondays hence. 2 Mondays, 14 sunrise to sunset cycles to patch cracks, trim invasive vines, and transform the Redland Texaco from ruin to relic. By late afternoon, Sophia departed for Miami to oversee the lab handoff, leaving me with the hum of katydids and the low growl of an approaching engine. My pulse spiked, but it was not Dexter. A white flatbed bearing chain-link panels creaked to a halt at the gate. Matteo had sent reinforcement. The contractor from yesterday returned with an extra truck, a silent truce between siblings forged in galvanized steel. I signed the delivery sheet, thanked the crew, and watched them reinforce weak fence points until dusk tinted the horizon coral and navy. Alone again, I set a ladder beneath the battered neon star and replaced 3 fractured porcelain letters with salvaged duplicates I had scavenged from a roadside antique barn at sunrise last weekend. Each screw squealed protest, yet when the final bulb flickered to life, the sign spelled "Star Fully" for the first time in decades. Standing atop the ladder, sweat trickling, I whispered an oath into the dusk. "I will not let anyone dim you again." I climbed down to find a text from Mariana. "Intriguing deck. Zoom tomorrow 10 a.m. Let's discuss impact framework." My heart tumbled. Not a promise, but a doorway. I typed back a confirmation, thumb shaking only slightly. Night stole over the palms, bringing a hush broken only by cicadas and the occasional pop of far-off firecrackers over Homestead. I locked the gate, checked the trail cam's battery, and walked the perimeter under flashlight beam, touching each fence post as though counting rosary beads. At the far corner where a bougainvillea tangled through chain links, I spotted a small rectangle wedged between wire and thorn, a business card glossy under moonlight. Dexter Cruz, Golden Arch Capital Consortium. We open doors others miss. The back bore 3 words in blue Sharpie, "Call before midnight." I read it twice, pulse steady now, more curious than fearful. I tore the card in half, dropped it on the gravel, and ground it beneath my boot until the letters dissolved into dust. Midnight came and went without a call. Instead, I sat on the hood of the Civic, the neon star buzzing overhead, and outlined talking points for tomorrow's Zoom. Heritage tax breaks, ecotourism influx, educational outreach to local high schools. I drafted volunteer sign-up sheets for Saturday's community cleanup. Flyers would go live on social media at dawn. My reflection in the windshield looked older than the woman who had signed the deed, but her eyes shone fiercer, steady as aged rum catching lamplight. When I finally began the drive back to Wynwood, first rain droplets kissed the windshield, summer's nightly baptism. The leaky skylight would drum a familiar lullaby, and in those rhythms I would rehearse the story again. Not ruin, not failure, but a century-old whisper unearthed beneath gasoline ghosts. And I would remind myself that sometimes legacy begins the moment you decide to stop asking for permission. The pale blush of dawn had barely flared above the Biscayne skyline when I propped my laptop on 2 stacked milk crates beneath the canopy, my improvised conference podium for the meeting that could rewrite the Texaco's fate. The air still tasted of last night's rain, cool and almost sweet before the Florida sun summoned its daily furnace. I positioned the camera so the battered neon star hovered like a crown above my shoulders and muted every notification except the calendar alert set for 10 o'clock. Then I walked the perimeter, reciting impact metrics under my breath the way some people whisper prayers. Projected visitor flow by year 3, job creation for homestead locales, net zero energy targets once the solar canopy rose. Cicadas shrilled from the palmettos as if applauding each statistic. At 10 on the dot, Mariana Reyes's face bloomed onto the screen. Slick auburn hair in a low twist, black-rimmed glasses reflecting the austere chic of her office. Behind her glimmered a wall of lucite trophies arranged like translucent chess pieces. She greeted me with a brisk smile that hinted neither warmth nor dismissal, and I felt a pulse of gratitude for Sophia's insistence that vision, not desperation, should lead the pitch. I opened with the story because stories outrun spreadsheets. A 100-year-old rum cache slumbering beneath a forgotten gas station, hurricane-proof vaults echoing with Prohibition's silence, a neon star relit after 3 decades of darkness. Mariana's gaze sharpened, though she kept her fingers templed beneath her chin. I moved on to hard angles, Claire's structural scans proving viability, Greta's penciled inspection date, tax incentives for adaptive reuse of historical fuel stations. I referenced Matteo's renderings, sliding them into view. Art Deco tasting pavilion, barrel-aged classroom, solar panels shimmering like desert fish scales. I finished with the ask, a convertible note of $500,000 secured by auction proceeds already gestating in lab vials of century-old rum. Mariana leaned back, eyes narrowing, not skepticism, rather the micro-gestures of an investor measuring gravity. "Your numbers are conservative," she said at last. "That's unusual in heritage pitches. Many founders overinflate visitor counts." "I'd rather underpromise and pour the surplus into hurricane resilience," I replied and meant it. She nodded once, decisive. "Send full cap table details by end of day." "My team will finish due diligence within 72 hours. If everything checks, expect a term sheet next week." A jolt of disbelief surged through me, but I kept my voice level. "You'll have the documents before sundown." Mariana's image vanished. The call ended. For a few seconds, I stared at the blank screen, pulse roaring in my ears. Then I let out a ragged laugh that bounced off canopy steel. Funds were not in hand yet the gate had swung open wider than I'd dared hope. Before adrenaline could taper, Sophia's truck pulled in. She hopped out, waving a manila envelope. "Lab results," she called. "Seals intact, alcohol content pristine, negligible evaporation." I tore it open. The certificate glowed with official insignias, proof that our bottles were not dusty vinegar, but liquid gold. Sophia grinned like a proud alchemist. Auction houses will duel for these. We spent midday photographing each certified bottle against a velvet backdrop inside the cool vault. The cognac flasks sang under the lens, amber hearts pulsing with torchlight hues. Between shots, Sophia drafted the authentication dossier while I assembled Daniela, the barista who'd bought my Vespa months ago, and 3 volunteers recruited through yesterday's social posts. Together, we hauled plywood, swept out shattered glass, and painted the store's interior walls a warm sand tone, masking decades of mildew with broad, confident strokes. Daniela, paintbrush tucked behind one ear, proposed a pop-up espresso cart for opening day. I promised her first refusal rights. By mid-afternoon, the sun torched the parking slab. Heat shimmered in translucent waves. Matteo arrived unannounced in a powder blue pickup stacked with reclaimed lumber and a generator. He handed me a pair of architect-grade goggles and pointed toward the sagging roofline above the store. Let's brace that soffit before Greta's clipboard sees daylight. We worked side by side, silent but companionable, drills whining, sawdust spiraling in golden halos. At one point he straightened, wiping sweat, and muttered, "Dad will explode when he learns you closed VC before him." I smirked. That's half the fun. Just after 5, a cloud of dust billowed down the frontage road. A rust-maroon sedan screeched to a stop outside the fence. Dexter stepped out alone, khaki blazer rumpled, eyes darting. He inspected the razor ribbon, the fresh steel posts, the padlocked gate, and the small laminated sign now bolted at eye level. Historic site. Authorized personnel only. Trespassers will be prosecuted. For a breath he looked deflated, then he spotted me, atop the ladder, and pasted on his salesman grin. "Zara," he called, voice sliding through the chain link. "I brought an apology." He held up a narrow box. Even from 10 yards I recognized bottle dimensions. "One of your uncle's first edition Cabernets. Consider it peace." I climbed down, dusted my hands, and stopped 2 steps from the gate. "My uncle grows mangoes, Dexter." His grin twitched. "Fine, no family angle. Just a reminder we can still work together." "Investors love my pitch skills." Behind me, footsteps scuffed. Matteo appeared, drill still in hand. Dexter's gaze flicked to the tool, then back to me. "Offer stands until tomorrow lunchtime," he said softly. "After that I walk, and I'm not the only one knocking on doors." I looked at him through the mesh, remembering the shiver of betrayal when I first learned the Texaco's inflated price. "You walked the moment you tried to pry open that hatch," I answered. "There's no return ticket." Dexter's eyes chilled. He set the box on the asphalt, turned, and drove off, tires coughing gravel. I did not retrieve the bottle. Let the night scavengers claim it. Dusk settled lavender over the palms. Volunteers departed waving paint-stained hands. Matteo tossed his goggles into the pickup bed and murmured, "You know he won't give up." "I'm counting on it," I replied, locking the gate. "A man that loud leaves tracks. We'll know every step he takes." Inside the store, the fresh paint gleamed under temporary LED strips. Sophia pinned the lab certificate to a corkboard beside the architect renderings, like a saint's relic beside a cathedral blueprint. I copied Mariana's due diligence request onto my to-do wall, then drafted liability documents for Saturday's community cleanup. Night deepened, and the neon star winked to life, casting rose-gold light over the forecourt. I stood beneath it, palms braced on cool chrome pump handles, and let the hum vibrate through bone. The Texaco smelled now of damp wood, fresh paint, and faint sugar oak notes drifting from the vault, scents of progress, of stories refusing extinction. Tomorrow's sunrise would bring lawyers' questions, Greta's inspection checklist, perhaps Dexter's counter-strike. But as I gazed at that revivified star, I finally felt the scales shift. The past no longer weighed me down. It lifted. A ballast turned sail. I whispered gratitude to the land, to the secret cellar, to every battered dream that had taught me resilience. And I promised anew that the Redland Texaco would rise, not as a monument to luck, but as a living proof that failure, met with stubborn grace, can ferment into legacy as potent as Rome, aged a century in darkness. The morning of the community cleanup broke in a blaze of tangerine light across the scrublands, as though the Florida sky itself meant to christen the Redland Texaco with a painter's brush of hope. Before the first caravan of volunteers arrived, I stood alone under the pump canopy and let the sunrise bathe the cracked concrete in sheets of molten amber. I breathed slowly, tasting salt and loam, reminding myself that whatever storm still lurked, this single dawn, this convergence of effort, was proof the project had already begun to root itself in more hearts than my own. By 8:30, the frontage road bustled like a pop-up festival. Daniela's turquoise espresso cart hissed fragrant steam. A high school environmental club from Homestead unloaded rakes and burlap sacks. 2 retired Coast Guard veterans, friends of Sergeant Alvarado, pulled up with a trailer of pressure washers. Mateo arrived last, his pickup stacked with cedar planks, and greeted the swarm of volunteers with the calm cadence of an orchestra conductor. He pinned a printed site map to the fencing, assigning teams: litter detail to the west verge, invasive vine clearing along the back fence, paint scraping on the facade. I watched, stunned at how seamlessly the blueprint of my anxious midnight brainstorming had materialized into footfalls and hammer blows. Amid the bustle, Sophia perched on a stepladder inside the store, photographing every phase for the grand packages Mariana's analysts would surely request. She paused long enough to wave me over and hand up a fresh printout, Mariana's due diligence checklist, a lean 2 pages of bullet points. The phrase, preliminary term sheet in drafting, glowed like gilding halfway down. My pulse skipped, then steadied, another rung on the still rising ladder. The first few hours blurred into a rhythm of motion. I worked shoulder to shoulder with a group of college students sanding rust from the canopy trusses. Flakes of oxidized paint fluttered like red snow whenever we struck with wire brushes. Every so often, I glanced across the forecourt to the hatch, its new industrial padlock flashing silver in the sun, and whispered silent thanks that the vault below remained undisturbed. Just before noon, a dust plume spiraled along the frontage road, resolving into a county sedan bearing the Historic Preservation Division seal. Greta stepped out in khaki slacks and a wide-brimmed field hat, clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Her arrival was unannounced. Inspection day was still 9 dawns away, but I took it as both omen and opportunity. I waved her through the gate, introduced myself again, and guided her toward a temporary shade tent where Claire's structural scans and Mateo's renderings waited. Greta's eyes darted from the energized volunteers to the humming espresso cart, to the fence topped with razor ribbon. "I expected a ruin," she said, her voice measured yet curious. "But you already resemble a living museum." She leafed through Claire's reports, lingered over a drone photo of the vault corridor. "I won't prejudge the commission, yet your documentation is thorough. Keep this momentum, and your chance of designation is strong." Before she could finish, a sharp whistle cut across the site, one of the Coast Guard veterans signaling trouble. A small crowd had gathered near the southern fence line where the bougainvillea climbed. At its base, lying half concealed by thorny vines, was a handheld angle grinder and an empty gasoline can. Fresh footprints pressed the damp soil. Rage surged hot, but I tamped it down, turning to Greta. Our offense may have deterred, but clearly someone still hopes to breach. The site's historical value is already drawing unwanted attention. Greta narrowed her eyes, snapped a photograph of the abandoned tools, and scribbled a note. "Security measures will strengthen your case, Miss Mendoza. I suggest a motion lighting system along the rear perimeter before final review." I promised installation within 3 days. Midday heat thickened until the air felt chewable, but Daniela's iced espressos kept spirits high. Volunteers painted the facade a gentle cream that Matteo swore matched archival Texaco photos. The washed bricks seemed to exhale, layers of grime surrendering to color. A pair of teenage graffiti artists, recruited via social media, filled a cinder-block sidewall with a mural. A stylized hummingbird hovering over a vintage fuel pump, its wings etched in swirling Caribbean blues, a nod to the lock's hidden emblem and the liquid treasure below. Watching them work, I felt the first glimmer of a public narrative taking shape, art stitching present to past with bold, defiant lines. As afternoon waned, Mariana called. Her first words? Our analysts verified the lab data. Potency and provenance align. Expect the term sheet in 48 hours. She spoke of convertible equity, impact metrics, community revenue shares. Numbers danced in my head, but one phrase anchored me. 48 hours. 2 sunsets, and the Texaco's resurrection would move from faith to funding. Yet nearly on the heels of triumph came tension. At 3 p.m., an alert from the trail camera pinged my phone. A frame of Dexter's maroon sedan idling across the highway shoulder, telephoto lens protruding from the driver's window. He was cataloging our progress. I texted Matteo, who deployed 2 volunteers to park trucks as a blockade, shielding the hatch side from prying lenses. Dexter reversed and drove off, but the message was clear. The game of cat and crowbar had shifted into surveillance. Dusk spilled lilac and peach over the nearly transformed site. We wrapped brushes, coiled extension cords, and posed for a group photo before the hummingbird mural. Greta, having spent the afternoon interviewing volunteers, squeezed my arm and whispered, "Keep this heartbeat alive, Zara. The commission will see it." She climbed into her sedan and drove away, trailing dust that glowed rose gold in the dying light. Volunteers trickled out. The espresso cart clinked shut. Cicadas replaced human chatter. Alone again, I carried the grinder Dexter had abandoned to the dumpster, each clank of broken teeth against steel echoing the stubborn persistence of those who chase profit without patience. Then I walked the forecourt one last time, neon star flickering on overhead, and noticed how the new cream paint had softened the store's once grim outline. Where ruin had stood, possibility now claimed territory, still fragile, still contested, but undeniably alive. Back at the Civic, I opened Mariana's latest email, a draft timeline projecting the first micro-auction of rum within 3 months, with provisional revenue earmarked for hurricane-proof solar panels. I closed my eyes, picturing the tasting pavilion bathed in lamplight, tourists tracing the mural, school groups descending into the vault with handheld lamps. I thought of my father's frosted voice and Dexter's prowling silhouette, then let them fade behind the louder chorus of volunteers laughing over paint-spattered shoes. Tomorrow would demand security lights, insurance binders, and fine-print legal review of Mariana's term sheet. But tonight, as a late summer breeze rustled through cabbage palms, I finally allowed myself to feel it. Not just determination or defiance, but joy. Joy that sprang from the clang of hammers, the scent of paint, the shared labor of strangers who believed old walls could house new futures. Joy that tasted faintly of aged rum and the thunderstorm promise of history being written, not by accidents or heirs, but by those who choose to listen when the past knocks from beneath the floorboards and asks to breathe again. The ringtone at dawn was thunder deep, vibrating atop the plywood desk where I had fallen asleep beside a half-empty mug of Daniela's cold brew. I surfaced from a dream of hummingbirds and hurricanes, blinking at the skylight's first ghost-gray glow. The call flashed Reyes Ventures. Heart vaulting, I answered. "Zara," Mariana said without preamble, "the term sheet is finalized. It lands in your inbox within the hour. Convertible equity, zero interest bridge for the first 12 months, and a community revenue share carved out at 10% signed before midnight and funds wire by Friday. She paused, softening her tone. Congratulations, Guardian. The line clicked dead. I stared at the phone until the screen dimmed, pulse drumming a marching cadence. Sign before midnight, funds by Friday, everything about to crystallize. The instinct to sprint to the printer clashed with the weight of responsibility. Legal eyes first, insurance riders, Sophia's concurrence, Matteo's review. The rising sun had barely licked the horizon, yet the day already felt brimful. After quick shower and triple espresso, I arrived at Redland Texaco to find Matteo pacing beside the gate, thumbs flying over his phone. A thin sheen of worry haloed his brow. Morning, he muttered, then thrust the screen toward me. A local blog headlined, Mystery Treasure Under Abandoned Homestead Gas Station? Investors Swarm. The article quoted sources close to the deal, claiming million-dollar rum stashes and a looming buyout by a holding consortium. Dexter's fingerprints all over it. We expected leaks, I said, steadying my breath. Now we control the narrative, I messaged Sophia. Press release today. Truth, but on our terms. We opened the gate, where the fresh mural glowed in sunrise coral. Volunteers would arrive by 9 for day 2 of cleanup, but first the rear perimeter needed motion lights. Matteo and I carried LED flood lamps while cicadas tuned their morning orchestra. Clambering onto the back canopy, we drilled brackets into weather-beaten steel, stringing conduit like silver vines. Sweat pooled, but with each bolt, the hatch's shadowed corner grew less inviting to trespass. At 8:30, Sophia's jeep crunched over gravel. She waved a stapled packet overhead, the lab's extended analysis confirming the cognac possessed volatile compounds ranking in the 99th percentile of preservation. She tucked the packet into my tool belt like a talisman and opened her laptop on a folding table. We release a statement at noon, she said. No dollar values, only heritage language, cultural preservation, community stewardship, educational tourism. We include one photo, the hummingbird mural, not the vault. We starved Dexter's rumor mill. Volunteers trickled in, the high schoolers again, plus a trio of craft beer brewers from Wynwood eager to barter elbow grease for future tasting room tours. Daniela wheeled her espresso cart to its new spot under the freshly braced soffit. Music crackled from a portable speaker, a playlist of salsa and indie folk weaving hope into every brushstroke. While teams sanded rust off the aged signage, I retreated inside the store with a stack of insurance binders delivered by courier. Liability, builder's risk, art artifact coverage. Paragraphs blurred, but one clause leapt. Coverage contingent on round-the-clock security. I scribbled a note. Hire night guard service. At 11, a rumble shook the forecourt. Claire Yoon's pickup returned, this time hauling a flatbed of drainage trench grates. She hopped down, surveyed the volunteers, and flashed a thumb up. We can start cutting slab tomorrow, she said, but you'll need half the invoice up front. I nodded, thinking of Mariana's funds. Friday felt both imminent and eternally distant. Noon. Sophia hit send on the press release. Within minutes, my phone pinged with retweets from Miami heritage accounts, then a local TV station requesting on-camera comments. We agreed to a brief interview on site the next morning. Control continued through visibility, Sophia insisted. While she fielded reporters, I reviewed the term sheet under the tent, red-penning any phrase that smelled of ironclad clause. 10% revenue share for community programs felt generous. Interest holiday for 12 months? Merciful. Yet a clause buried on page 4 bound me to deliver the first public opening within 18 months or relinquish a chunk of equity. I inhaled. 18 months. A heartbeat and an epoch all at once. I penciled a margin note for my attorney and pressed on. Mid-afternoon thunderheads muscled over the Everglades, bruising the sky. Volunteers secured tarps, but droplets arrived swift and warm. Work paused. Laughter did not. We crowded beneath the canopy, sharing paper cups of iced café con leche while rain painted the forecourt silver. Somewhere in that hush my phone buzzed. A restricted number. I stepped aside. My father's voice, low and precise. Your press release made the business wires. Impressive. A pause waited with more than words. If you sign that venture sheet, ensure the board control clauses favor you, not the fund. I swallowed, rain drumming metal overhead. I have counsel. I'm aware. Still, a second set of eyes, mine, could help. The offer hovered, neither olive branch nor noose. I'll consider it, I said, surprising us both. We ended the call in uneasy truce. Rain eased by 4, leaving puddles that mirrored a sky scrubbed clean. Volunteers departed with promises of tomorrow. Matteo loaded tools, then lingered by the gate. Dad called me too, he confessed, eyes searching mine. He's worried and proud, though he'll never admit it. I'll take progress in any form, I said, locking the chain. We shared a sibling smile, soft and incredulous, before he drove off into peach-washed light. Evening settled. Alone again, I descended into the vault, lantern in hand, to whisper gratitude to the bottles that had birthed this whirlwind. In the glow, glass and wax shimmered like constellations. I traced the crate's stenciled letters, promising protection, promising purpose. Back above, the neon star flared ruby against indigo dusk. I opened my laptop, attached the marked-up term sheet to an email addressed to my attorney, Mariana, and, yes, my father. Subject, review round, feedback by 2100 appreciated. My finger hovered, then pressed send. Wind rustled through the cabbage palms, carrying the distant scent of ocean and wet asphalt. The Texaco breathed with me, restored walls, humming lights, volunteers' laughter still echoing. Day by day, bolt by bolt, we were proving that legacies are built not from inheritance alone, but from the fierce decision to claim and mend what others discard. Tomorrow, the cameras would arrive. Dexter would plot. Funds would wire or waver. Yet beneath the star's steady hum, I felt ready, fortified by community, by rum aged in secrecy, by the stubborn architecture of my own will. I closed my eyes, hearing the past and future converse in the vaulted dark below, and whispered into the night, onward. Dawn cracked open like a ripe papaya, spilling ribbons of apricot over the still damp forecourt. I arrived before 6, the world hushed, except for distant roosters, and the faint sputter of Daniela's espresso cart pulling up the frontage road. The morning of our first television interview felt strangely tranquil, one last inhale before the next plunge. Inside the store-turned makeshift office, I discovered the term sheet in my inbox, annotated overnight by my attorney and my father. My attorney's comments were meticulous, flags on arbitration venues, vesting triggers, a suggestion to nudge the revenue share percentage upward by 0.5 point. My father's were fewer, but piercing. Clause 5.2, board veto gridlocks, fix, and beneath the equity reversion clause, a single question mark. I stared at his succinct edits, realizing they were neither sabotage nor takeover attempt. They were advice. The shock jolted me until Daniela's knock broke the spell. She handed over a matte black-to-go cup, double espresso, dash of brown sugar, and asked if the news crew needed power outlets. We'll run an extension, I promised, and followed her outside where a soft breeze peeled the last raindrops from palm fronds. By 8:15, the WSVN van rolled in, satellite dish unfurling like a mechanical lotus. Reporter Liza Cortez stepped out in a crimson blazer, heels clicking on the freshly swept concrete. She surveyed the mural, the volunteers setting up ladders, the new motion lights glinting along the rear fence, and smiled like she'd struck ratings gold. We mic'd up beneath the neon star, its buzz now part of the site's heartbeat, while Sophia coordinated B-roll angles, insisting the crew capture the hummingbird tableau and teenagers repainting trim, but no shots of the hatch. Live in 3, 2, camera red light flared. Liza opened with an evocative tease about a forgotten gas station, a century-old secret, and a community fighting to keep history alive. Then she pivoted the mic to me. I breathed once and spoke. How the Texaco stood at the hinge of Prohibition-era trade routes. How rum once moved like lifeblood through hidden channels. How we hoped to convert this battered relic into Florida's first rum heritage and innovation. Center, museum, tasting room, renewable energy landmark, all in one. Behind me, volunteers cheered on cue, turning labor into living backdrop. Can you confirm rumors of multi-million-dollar artifacts? Liza pressed, eyebrow sharp. I kept Sophia's script. We've discovered historically significant spirits currently under expert authentication. Their value will be reinvested in site restoration and community programs. Truth, bear it to bone. 3 minutes later, the segment wrapped, the camera shut off, and Liza shook my hand. He'll hate this, she murmured, nodding toward the road where Dexter's sedan prowled again at a distance. Free positive press is a villain's nightmare. Sophia escorted the crew out satisfied. As she passed, she whispered, Impact narrative control. Achieved. The next onslaught came at 9:30. Claire's team returned with concrete saws, chisels, and safety barricades to cut the drainage trench. Sparks flew in orange arcs while volunteers lined up to carry debris to the dumpster. I joined the bucket brigade, the metallic scent of wet aggregate filling my nostrils. Each shovel felt lighter with the knowledge Mariana's funds would arrive tomorrow. Monday's paycheck for Claire was secure. Yet vigilance remained pulse-deep. Trail cam pings arrived intermittently, Dexter's car circling, then retreating. At noon, a UPS van delivered 2 crates addressed to Sophia. Archival-grade, climate-controlled cases for the first rum bottles. We transferred the 12 Santiago Añejos and 6 Quinta Blanca cognacs with surgical care. Watching the velvet-lined foam swallow those bottles, I felt like I'd tucked sleeping dragons into fireproof cocoons. While Sophia sealed the crates, I retreated to the office and compared attorney edits with my father's notes. Clause 5.2 indeed allowed deadlock if both investor and founder held equal veto rights. My father suggested a rotating supervote after 24 months, elegant and fair. I keyed the amendment, then typed a 3-sentence reply. Appreciate the insight. Rotating supervote inserted. Zara. Seconds later, his response pinged. A single thumbs-up emoji. For Lorenzo Mendoza, that equaled a standing ovation. Mid-afternoon sun hammered the forecourt. Volunteers broke for mango popsicles donated by a local paleta shop, laughter rising like birdsong. I stepped aside to meet Aiden 1 from Coral Guard Security, a lean man with radiant curiosity in his eyes. We walked the perimeter. He recommended 2 roaming guards from dusk to dawn, along with an AI camera cluster that would ping our phones, plus local police if human motion crossed the fence line. I signed the contract on the hood of his truck, relief loosening the knot between my shoulders. Tonight, the Texaco would not sleep alone. At 4, while Claire's crew power-washed their tools, a deputy from Miami-Dade Sheriff's Office arrived to collect the grinder and gas can as evidence. Trespass investigation officially opened. Watching the deputy bag Dexter's would-be break-in hardware, I realized the site's transformation was no longer mine alone. It belonged to statutes, inspectors, neighbors, press, anonymous donors on the crowdfunding page. Sophia quietly launched that. Morning, already at $11,000. Dusk tumbled fast. One by one volunteers departed, waving paint-smudged hands beneath salmon skies. Motion lights clicked on, flooding the hatch corner with unwavering white. The new night guards arrived, nodding silent greetings. Claire's trench now ran like a clean surgery scar, functional, a promise against floods. I locked the gate, then lingered in the stillness, laptop balanced on the hood. The amended term sheet waited for e-signature. Lights glowed inside the store, silhouetting the hummingbird mural through the window. The neon star fizzed to life overhead. I clicked sign. An email confirmation chimed. Funds, landing Friday. Somewhere beyond the palms, a sedan engine revved. Dexter, circling like a moth to a torch he couldn't touch. I smiled into the darkness, pocketed my phone, and whispered to the land. We're funded now. Let's soar. Hushed pre-dawn light spilled across the newly trenched forecourt like milk over slate. And for a fleeting moment, the Redland Texaco looked less like a renovation site and more like an installation in some open-air museum. Floodlights. Still glimmering from the night shift, cedar scaffolding casting crisp shadows, the hummingbird mural glowing faintly as if its wings remembered moonshine. I arrived before the night guards clocked out, greeting them with steaming paper cups of Daniela's darkest roast. Their presence had proven its worth. The trail cam footage showed Dexter's sedan circling just after midnight, headlights skating the fence before retreating when the guards' flashlights sliced the dark like scimitars. No attempt at entry, no fresh equipment abandoned, only the restless prowl of a thwarted grifter. The guards tipped their caps and drove off into a sky just beginning to blush. Inside the storefront office, the neon buzz was replaced by the gentle whir of a rented portable AC unit. The first minor luxury the soon-to-arrive funds would reimburse. Still half asleep, I opened my email to find Mariana's confirmation of wiring instructions and Claire's invoice for Phase 2 slab cutting, both waiting like twin sphinxes requiring the same password: trust. Sophia would not arrive until 9 to notarize the next shipping docket, and Matteo would be on site an hour later with cedar siding, so the quiet felt precarious, a blank page inviting either poetry or sabotage. I poured myself a cup of coffee, stepped outside beneath the dawning glow, and spoke aloud to the cracked canopy as though to an old friend. One more day nearer, and we'll never see the old ruin again. The first jolt of the morning came not from Dexter, but from the county inspector assigned to environmental safety, a lean woman named Dr. Lillian Ortiz, who pulled up unannounced in a hybrid jeep bearing the seal of Miami-Dade Environmental Affairs. Clipboard balanced on her forearm, she explained that a neighbor had filed an anonymous concern about possible fuel soil contamination. A thin smile told me she too suspected Dexter's fingerprints. Nevertheless, procedure was procedure. Doctor. Ortiz donned nitrile gloves, collected soil cores at 3 points along the pumps, and requested permission to sample groundwater at the newly exposed drainage trench. I consented, heart drumming behind my ribs, though Claire's earlier radar scans had revealed no obvious plumes as Doctor. Ortiz capped each vial. She complimented the volunteers' craftsmanship on the mural and jotted a note about community engagement beyond compliance. One hurdle acknowledged, if not yet cleared. Not long after she departed, Sophia arrived in her dusty jeep, the back seat packed with archival crates bearing the first batch of climate-controlled foam. Together, we sealed the Santiago and Quinta Blanca bottles into their traveling cocoons, each stamped with tamper-proof holograms provided by the lab. Watching the lid swallow those pieces of living history felt like tucking childhood dreams under lock and key. Sophia secured each crate pallet ready, then retrieved a printed manifest with barcodes and tracking numbers spelled out both numerically and in words. Redundant, yet necessary. "Courier will come at noon sharp," she said, slapping the top crate affectionately. "They fly cargo tonight. By dawn tomorrow, these dragons will sleep in a Brooklyn vault." Outside, Mateo's pickup rumbled onto the gravel, laden with boards of golden cedar and a crew of 2 apprentices carrying nail guns and spirit levels. He greeted Dr. Ortiz's departing jeep with a wave, then shot me an amused glance. "Still collecting dirt, I see." I forced a smile, but could not hide the worry. Mateo, sensing it, tapped the cedar planks. "Contamination or not, this siding goes up, rainproof and hurricane-rated. Give Homestead something to cheer at." His faith in wood and nails steadied me. The morning shifted into a cacophony of saws and laughter. Teens from the environmental club returned for a 3rd straight day, sanded the canopy posts to raw metal, and applied rust converter primer that stank pleasantly of vinegar. Daniela passed out coconut sweet cold brew. Claire's crew checked slab moisture with digital probes. Sophia released a series of social media reels showing time-lapse footage of mural progress accompanied by old swing-era jazz, part teaching tool, part brandstrategie. Every person, every motion felt stitched into a larger tapestry whose threads were no longer fear or scarcity, but shared determination. Shortly before noon, the courier truck arrived. 2 uniformed handlers scanned the pallets, counted seals, and loaded the crates into a temperature-controlled bay. I signed the bill of lading in triplicate, and Sophia photographed the handoff with her phone, date-stamped and GPS-tagged. As the truck pulled away, dust swirling, I felt both relief and hollowness, like shipping pieces of my own heart northward. Yet the crates represented far more alive here than buried. They were seeds of capital, water for dreams. No sooner had the courier vanished than a sleek silver SUV glided to the gate. Through the windshield, I recognized the severe cheekbones and steely eyes of Vivian Barnes, Dexter's silent partner from the day he first tried the new padlock. She stepped out, crisp suit uncreased by heat, and raised 2 gloved palms to show she carried no tools. "Ms. Mendoza," she called through the chain link, voice calm as cooled steel amidst. "Cruz has withdrawn his claim and believes your site deserves full success. I come with a proposal for a limited licensing deal, bottles marketed under your brand, our distribution network. No equity, merely royalty. May we schedule?" My first instinct was to laugh, but fatigue tempered anger into clarity. "Send the offer in writing," I replied, aware of volunteers eavesdropping. "We will review after historic designation. At present, site restoration takes precedence." Vivian nodded, unperturbed, slipped a cream envelope into the gate mesh, and departed without another syllable. I felt the envelope's weight. Possible olive branch, possible dagger, then pocketed it for later scrutiny. Afternoon sun roused cicadas to fever pitch. Cedar siding rose board by board, turning the store facade into something almost stately. Claire's crew finished trench reinforcements and poured quick-setting concrete dyed the color of bleached sand, so runoff would vanish into the earth with grace once the first autumn storm arrived. Dr. Ortiz texted preliminary soil core data. Hydrocarbon trace below threshold, groundwater clean so far, and I allowed myself one long exhalation, eyes stinging with the gift of good news. At dusk, the volunteers packed brushes, but Mateo lingered atop a scaffold to fix the final cedar plank. With a rubber mallet, he tapped it flush, then shouted down, "Done!" Applause rippled across the forecourt. As if on cue, lightning flickered distantly beyond the Everglades, illumining the neon star for a heartbeat before darkness reclaimed it. Daniela dimmed the espresso cart's lights and Sophia snapped one last photograph. The Texaco reborn in cedar and cream, hummingbird wings iridescent under floodlights, storm halo shimmering at the horizon. Later, alone, I retrieved Vivian's envelope. Inside lay a single sheet of heavyweight paper bearing Golden Arch Capital's letterhead, and beneath it a check, $5,000 goodwill advance, payable to Redland Heritage Fund. I stared at the numeral, then the words spelled out in ink, and felt a cold weight settle behind my sternum. The signature line read, Dexter Cruz. No terms, no contract, only a gesture, temptation, perhaps, or apology. I tore the check in half, then again, and fed the pieces to the portable AC's whirring intake, watching them vanish like sparks up a flue. Midnight found me beneath the neon star, sipping leftover cold brew gone metallic, listening to the night guard's quiet banter and the distant boom of surfacing frogs. Tomorrow, Friday, the wire would land and the real construction could begin. Inspections lay days away. Licensing offers would swirl. Maybe Dexter would escalate. But funds, community, and history now stood on my side like steadfast pillars. For the first time in this feverish journey, I allowed myself to imagine the grand opening. Lanterns strung above the courtyard, cedar walls fragrant in the humid dusk, glasses clinking with rum, older than any guest present, laughter echoing through. The once abandoned vaults. I envisioned my father standing afar off, arms crossed but eyes proud, and Matteo guiding tourists through the mural's story of wing and flame. I pictured a child, one of today's volunteers perhaps, pressing a curious fingertip to the glass case of a Santiago bottle and whispering, "Someone saved this for us." And I answered that future whisper aloud, voice soft but resolute, "We saved it." Together, Friday unfurled with the hush of promise, a dawn so clear it felt as if the sky itself had been polished overnight to mirror the rising cedar facade. I reached the Texaco before first light, palms tingling, pulse hitching at each little ping of my phone until, just after the eastern horizon blushed pink, the awaited notification glowed. Funds wired, ledger updated, balance transformed from drought to downpour. I stood beneath the neon star, blinking into that gleaming screen, then tipped my face to the newborn sun and let out a laugh that shot across the silent forecourt like a starter's pistol for the day's sprint. Within the hour, the site roared to life. Claire's crew returned with concrete mixers and rebar cages, ready to pour the second drainage trench now that money flowed like water through open sluice gates. Matteo's apprentices unstrapped glass-filled crates that would become clerestory windows in the tasting room. Daniela, sensing celebration, swapped her usual espresso playlist for crackling swingera mambo, and the horns seemed to chase last bits of fatigue into the swaying palms. Even the night guards stayed past their shift, wielding rakes and sledgehammers as though they, too, had a stake in every board and bolt. Mid-morning brought the next rite of passage, Dr. Ortiz's official report. She strode through the gate crisply, silver tablet in hand, and met me beneath the canopy. "Hydrocarbons negligible, groundwater clean, air quality clear," she pronounced, stylus tapping approval boxes. "No environmental impediments to historic designation." Relief rocked me back on my heels, but before gratitude could unfurl properly, the rumble of another engine snarled at the fence. Dexter's maroon sedan rolled to a stop, but this time a patrol cruiser glided in right behind, lights quiet, yet authority undeniable. The deputy who had collected the grinder stepped out, hand resting on his belt. Dexter emerged, face pinched, while the deputy recited trespass warnings and invited him to accompany the county marshal for questioning regarding attempted break-in on private historic property. Dexter's gaze flicked to me, anger, maybe regret, but he said nothing as steel cuffs whispered shut. The patrol lights flashed once, like a camera capturing final frame, and the sedan carried Dexter away down the dusty road. The volunteers paused only long enough to exchange murmurs, then returned to their work, momentum unbroken. By noon, Greta herself arrived with 2 commissioners in tow, each wearing sun hats and expressions of curious awe at the transformation since their last glimpse. Cedar walls gleamed golden. The hummingbird mural now framed a newly installed vintage Texaco pump repainted Art Deco teal. Solar panel mounts awaited their gleaming cargo. Claire unfurled blueprints beneath an awning, tracing drainage paths and shear wall reinforcements, while Greta's entourage nodded, impressed. I guided them to the vault hatch, padlock replaced by a stainless clasp engraved with the same hummingbird motif, and lanterns in hand, we descended into cool silence. Even commissioners accustomed to grand courthouses drew breath when the beam, swept across crates stamped Havana imports and Nassau spirits, now secured behind climate-controlled mesh. I spoke of provenance, of the community revenue share promised by the venture note, of school partnerships already drafting curricula on smuggling routes and barrel-aging chemistry. In that subterranean hush, words turned into living oath. Back above, a vote was called then and there, quorum met, the motion to grant preliminary historic landmark status, passing unanimously. Greta pressed an embossed certificate into my hands, warm from the sun, and murmured, "This place belongs to every story still untold." Applause erupted, Sophia filming everything for the archives. In that pressing moment I felt something shift. The Texaco was no longer rescue in progress, but officially recognized piece of Florida's living heart. Just before sunset, as volunteers packed away tools and the sky kindled tangerine once more, a sleek black sedan eased to the gate. My father stepped out, alone, carrying a slim parcel wrapped in brown craft paper. He said nothing while I unlocked the chain, only offered a slight nod when I swung the gate inward. We walked the forecourt together, his gaze lingering over cedar siding, mural, solar brackets, as though recalculating the world. Finally, beneath the neon star, he passed me the parcel. Inside lay an antique brass plumb bob engraved with the Mendoza crest, dulled by decades of engineering sweat. "This guided the foundations of the first Coral Crown Tower," he said, voice even. "Now it is yours. Build higher." Heat pricked my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, neither apology nor triumph, merely the bridge we both needed. He studied the neon glow, then the volunteers laughing near Daniela's cart, and I saw realization flicker. Legacy was not inheritance handed down, but lineage built outward, many hands shaping the same stone. Night settled velvet soft, cicadas rising in chorus as the first string of Edison bulbs Matteo had rigged across the courtyard blinked on, bathing cedar, chrome, and mural in honeyed light. Volunteers returned, families in tow, drawn back by texted invitation for an impromptu illumination ceremony. Daniela ladled hibiscus punch into tin cups, while Sophia queued up a swing record crackling with horns and upright bass. Claire cranked the neon transformer. The Texaco star flared ruby, then steadied, humming like distant surf. I climbed the small platform beside the renovated pump, plumb bob clutched in both palms, and lifted my voice to the gathered circle. "What was buried is now shared," I said. "What was ruin is now refuge." History hid underground until we listened, and now it will speak through every light, every tour, every taste of rum that traveled a century to reach this night. A cheer rippled outward, not loud but deep. We counted down 3 slow heartbeats and hit the switch that sent power through the new solar inverter. Along the roofline, concealed LED strips breathed to life, painting the cedar in warm gold. The hummingbird mural shimmered as if its wings beat invisible air. Lanterns strung between palms ignited one by one like fireflies learning choreography. The vault below, now linked to sensors, glowed a gentle amber through its tempered glass door, hinting at secrets yet safe. Music lifted, couples swayed, laughter spilled like creek water over stones. My father accepted a tin cup from Daniela and toasted with Matteo beneath the neon. Sohia spun in lazy circles, filming volunteers who had once been strangers and now grinned as owners of a story reborn. Overhead, the star buzzed steady, guardianship made visible. Hours later, when the final Edison bulb winked out and the guards resumed their posts, I lingered alone under the canopy, brass plumb bob cool in my palm. Wind rustled the bougainvillea, carrying salt from the far coast, and faint gasoline memory rising from the road, a reminder of every failed venture, every mocking laugh, every night I asked the cracked ceiling if I was merely a footnote. The neon star answered now, its glow reflecting in the plumb bob's burnished curve. No footnote, but a chapter heading. I tucked the plumb bob into my bag, locked the gate, and walked toward the future, glowing past the palms. Somewhere behind me, the vault breathed. Cedar sighed, and aged rum dreamed of glasses yet raised. Ahead, the road unfurled in moonlit promise. And stepping into that promise, I felt the echo of a vow kept true. When past knocks from beneath the floorboards, answer with both hands and a hunger to build.